Grand Austria Hotel is really interesting game. It's about attracting guests to your individual hotel. Each player is trying to fill up their rooms and cafe establishment
Mm-hmm.
with visiting guests. First, by feeding them and giving them coffee or wine or cake or whatever in your cafe, and then moving them up into a room in the hotel by taking dice from a common pool, each of which grants a particular action.
You have a board for your common pool of dice, and then you have the main board where you pick from a tableau of five different potential guests, all of whom have particular predilections when it comes to eating and drinking. And you have four options, just to digress a tiny bit, in order to feed or slake their thirst. You have, as Eddie said, wine and coffee or strudel and cake. And so on that same main board, you have what is known as the Emperor track, which I will let Eddie get into because I hate it. And then you have your round markers and a couple goals. So after you grab some guests for your hotel, you put them in your cafe, which is the bottom floor of your personal player board, which is the third board. And you have three beautifully set up tables. And so you have three slots for guests. And the goal of the game is to get them into hotel rooms, which are above the ground floor of your hotel, and to do so by basically feeding them whatever they want.
And once those needs are satisfied, you can then discard that card and take the special action or reward that each of those guests have listed on their card. It may be earn money, it may be go up on this previously mentioned Emperor track, it may be close an additional room, it may be hire a guest for less money than you normally would. Any of these things, it's
Hire a
definitely
staff member.
good. Not hire a staff member or attract a new guest for free.
Yes.
So these things are very good to do, and you want to get your guests fed and placed into a room, and you have to have your room prepared before you can actually move them out of your cafe where they're just taking up space until you can get them into that room. And preparing a room is a separate action taken from those dice that Bianca mentioned.
And most importantly, as Eddie said, you need some luck in terms of what either player rolls. Now, this is a common pool of dice, so the luck affects both players equally. Um, but you have six columns, and each of them corresponds to an action. So, for example, taking wine and coffee, or strudel and cake, or opening a new room, or taking cash, or earning points on the Emperor track, or hiring a staff member. And so you're trying to figure out how to best use the dice as you go along. And then the turns are staggered because they're not alternating, they're staggered. You have someone who's going one, at least for a two-person game, you have someone who's going first and fourth, and then the other person's going second and third.
Yeah, and that can be kind of rough in a four-player game. So much so that the designers have come up with an alternate turn structure that they say is a little less balanced, but official and approved nonetheless, where play just goes around clockwise. But in a four-player game, you could be the first player. You go first and eighth in the round because you get two actions per round. And an action is just simply looking at how the dice are stacked up in these six available action slots and taking one off of the board and keeping it in front of you. The interesting thing about this is that in certain games you might think that if there's an abundance of one type of action, like say we rolled a bunch of fives, and that gives you a particular action, which is to hire
Staff
staff
members.
members. Um, you might think your instinct might be, oh, there's so many of those, I don't need to jump on that right away. I should take rarer things. But in this game, the number of dice that are on each available action indicates how many times you will take that action or the degree of benefit you get from that action. So you want to jump on those actions that have a great number of dice as opposed to the other way around. And since there's just such a high degree of randomness when you're rolling 10 to 14 dice and then hoping that your numbers come up, the game incorporates an interesting passing mechanic, which I think is very valuable to the gameplay. Wherein
Absolutely.
you say, okay, I'm gonna pass. Everyone else finishes out their turn in that round, and then the player with the lowest number turn order slot throws away a die in the trash bin and re-rolls everything.
Literally the trash bin.
And then after those dice are re-rolled and replaced in their new action slots, giving a whole new set of choices for all the players, that player takes his or her turn, and then the following players can either go with that or pass again. So the passing mechanic, at first when I played, I didn't really capitalize on it enough, but it in later games it factored in over and over because sometimes you want to take an action. If you're strategizing, which you can do in this game, it's not entirely tactical. You have to say, okay, I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna get rid of a die, and I want to try to get the action that I think I need to be more successful. And it's got
Yeah.
that push your luck to it,
Well, also,
which
there's definitely a
is like
time
crack.
crunch. There's definitely a time crunch in terms of why it's valuable to pass because there are relatively few rounds in the game.
Hmm.
So even if you have a specific strategy, there's a certain degree of anxiety about completing that strategy that really encourages you to pass when you're not getting the dice that you want.
Mm, yeah. So how do you like that whole dice drafting mechanic?
I actually really like it. Well, I like it in the context of this game. I like that there are six different actions, and I like that they specifically correspond to the dice. And I like visually how it's set up. You literally have six different columns,
Hmm.
um, and it's
Yeah, the ones sit on the pastry shelf,
exactly
and the twos sit in front of the wine and the coffee machine. It's really
so.
thematic and great art by I
Yeah,
think it's Clements Franz.
and organizationally, I just think it's really well done, and that that is something that I apparently really
Yeah.
cherish.
No, no, it's when you look at the game and see how all the mechanics interact together, you wonder how these guys thought this up.
That's
You
true.
know, like, geez, this is a really complex set of interactions, and they're just brilliant to
Yeah.
have put this together. Um,
The fact that there are three boards, that each player is dealing with three boards, and yet it feels like one seamless
it
experience.
does run so smoothly,
Yeah,
despite the two decks of cards that do two different things, the board full of dice that you're drawing from, and a board full of chits that you're tokens that you're placing, filling up, and flipping over. It's pretty incredible.
yeah.
You know, plus dealing with the little bundle of cubes that you're moving onto your guest cards. It's like so much going on, and yet it's just smooth as silk. The first time I played, it was a little awkward because I like didn't know how to focus my energies, and that's the last couple of things that we didn't mention in great details, like that Emperor track you said. This is just it's almost like a secondary scoring track where throughout the game different actions, maybe certain guests and a particular action on the dice board will allow you to go up this Emperor track, and at the end of the game and in scoring rounds through the game you're going to be earning points off this Emperor track. But it's kind of like that old feed your people mechanic. At some point, you have to really stress out about, oh my God, am I going to have enough to do X, Y, or Z?
Mm.
And in this case, when you hit rounds 3, 5, and 7, there are a total of 7 rounds. At the end of these rounds, you are going to lose 3, 5, and 7 points on the Emperor track, and depending on where you end up, you're going to get a bonus at that point in the game. And if you're at 0, which is really easy to end up at,
Yeah.
like unless you're really pushing the Emperor track, you can end up at 0, at which point you are punished. One of the
Pretty severely.
Yeah.
I usually just get the staff member that lets me avoid
Pay $1.
Yeah, to avoid the Armageddon
Bribe the
that is the
Emperor.
Emperor track.
The other thing on the board that we wanted to mention, in addition to those 3 tiles that are randomized each game, there's a A, a B, and a C set of these
The 3 Emperor
awards
tiles,
and
just to be
penalties.
specific.
Yeah. There's also an A, B, and C stack of
Goals.
They're the politics cards, and they give you sort of long-term goals that everyone's competing for. And the first one to complete these, which may be like get to a certain point on the Emperor track, get a certain number of dollars, fill in 2 rows of rooms in your hotel, or fill out a certain number of reds and a certain number of blues. And there are a variety of different combinations. The first player to do that throws one of their player markers on there. They get 15 points. Second player to do it gets 10 points, and then it goes down. So you're sort of hurrying to get those, and those help sort of direct you in what you want to do. Because otherwise, I think if I were to sit down with this game, I'd be like, what do I focus on?
Yeah.
So it's really good to have those. And again, those are all variable every game, so it's a little bit of a different experience each time. So I think I feel like I incorporated my thoughts into the description of the game. I find that I really like the dice drafting mechanic because of the way that everyone's in the same boat and sort of fighting over what's available. I really do like that, and I like the fact that you have to decide whether what's out there is good enough for you, or if it's worth throwing away a die, which is another opportunity to benefit from whatever action it may have come up on, just so you can re-roll and try to get something a little bit better if what you really wanted wasn't available.
I don't like the Emperor track. Maybe that's a little overstating it, but I don't like the degree to which I feel as though it dominates the game. It causes a lot of anxiety, and because there are so few turns overall,
Mm-hmm.
it really
Yeah, each player gets 14 actions. Exactly,
right,
really.
exactly. And so it seems a bit much to have to dedicate so much time and so many actions to keeping yourself from slipping on the Emperor track. And it's so easy to be at 0. It's just so incredibly easy to be at 0. And like you said, the penalties are fierce.
Yeah, this is not a game of plenty, like you described Lost Valley.
Definitely not, but it's also a bit of a masochistic game in that sense, or a sadistic game, I guess. The Emperor track does feel a bit sadistic, and I don't love that. Although we played where we got rid of the penalty.
We tested playing without the penalty just to see how that would feel, and you just ignored.
And getting the bonus and not the penalty.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is I didn't ignore it. I just had a strategy that was not focused on that. And it's hard to cram in 2 different strategies, quite frankly. Yeah, it's definitely not easy. And the one thing that I will say about the staff cards is I agree with you. You really do have to rely on those a lot. And that did make for, in at least one time that we played, a really boring first 2 rounds, because it was just you and me taking 5s. We were both taking 5s for like 2 rounds, and that just it wasn't as stimulating or exciting.
That's true.
And then the other issue with the staff cards, which we solved with a workaround that has been condoned by the designers, is
it's actually in the rulebook.
Right.
Is drafting.
Okay. So when we first played, we definitely had very different hands. He had a very stacked deck of staff cards, and I literally just had the crappiest staff cards of all time, just like the weakest of the weakest, and I just had no chance whatsoever. And so we ended up doing that drafting variant, and that improved it dramatically.
Yeah, definitely. I think the staff cards are really important. But I have a couple of friends who were playing on Tuesday, and they had like 3 staff cards each. I felt like I came over, I was like, damn, you don't have, you have no staff cards. Whatever. I mean, like,
Well,
I
it
end up
depends
with
the
like nearing
multiples that
6.
well that you're trying to get. You are trying to get these astronomical scores of like
And they
150,
scored well, though.
and
These
like
guys had lapped the scoring track
I
and
don't
scored really
understand. See,
well.
I don't understand. I mean, I wasn't there, so it's hard for me to
Yeah.
know exactly what their strategy was.
A lot of
But
rooms, they achieved the goals. I think achieving the goals is super important. So,
yeah,
yeah, so
but
there may be a lot of different ways.
achieving the goals. Just to be fair to listeners, they are really difficult goals as well. Everything in this game
Yeah,
is
you have to
difficult.
sacrifice. You can't really get everything, you know?
Right, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And it's an uphill battle.
Yeah.
Every
It's like running
strategy
a
is an uphill
hotel.
battle. It
Really
is.
hard. Don't do it. Don't get
It
into
is.
hotels. I worked
It's
in a
like,
hotel for like 9 years.
yeah, it really is.
All right, so after all this, I'm still thinking about the game a lot.
Yeah,
So
it's
what
on
do
my
you
mind.
what do you think
I give it a 5.
a 5?
Absolutely.
Oh
I give it
wow.
a hard 5.
Despite all that.
Yeah, I give it a 5.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, for a certain group of people, I think it's a gamer's game. It's not great for young children, stuff like that. It's a certain subset of people who like to play board games, but it's a 5.
Yeah. Maybe.